Well, welcome everyone to our webinar today. I'm Donald McCormick and I will be your host for today. We're going to be recording the session, so you'll get a link to it when it's ready, well, as soon as it's ready after the webinar. And if you have any questions as we go along, then type them into the chat window. We'll try to have got a couple of people on who can respond to those in chat, or we can perhaps get to them Q&A at the end if there is time. If we don't get time to your question, we will make sure we follow up afterwards with answers. Now, as I'm sure you're all aware, that we pride ourselves here at Squirrel on the fact that Squirrel can be used to build amazing things from spreadsheets with no code, absolutely no code. But today is a little different because what we're talking about is building add-ons for Squirrel. And add-ons allow those of us with some coding skills to extend the possibilities of Squirrel so that everyone else can do even more with no code. So the content today is a little more technical than usual, but very powerful for it. And to guide us through this world of add-ons is Matt Dooligal, who is a key member of our development team and also author of a number of the add-ins already available in the Squirrel marketplace. Matt, it's all yours.
Great stuff. Thank you very much, Donald. Welcome everyone to the webinar today. What we're going to be looking at is building your first Squirrel 365 add-on. So we'll get started. So what we're going to cover in this session today, we'll do a very brief overview of the framework. Then we'll look at the developer program and how you get signed up. Then we're going to look at the Squirrel 365 add-on documentation, where you can get it, how to navigate it. Then we'll briefly look at setting up your environment and testing. We'll look at some of the internals of building a component, and we'll talk about the differences between a function component and just a normal visual component. We'll actually, with the time we've got, we'll try and get a full component built. And then what we'll do is go through publishing it to the Squirrel 365 marketplace, so you can see the full end-to-end and hopefully give you a good starting point to get you going on building add-ons for Squirrel. So the add-on framework, what is it? Well, the Squirrel team, it's a framework that allows the Squirrel team to release new components between our core release cycles. So we're releasing sort of quarterly. This allows us to actually get new components into the hands of people a lot quicker. We can build them in an isolated way, test them, and then get them out to people. Also, we find if there's some of our customers who need something fairly niche, it's not suitable for the wider community, Squirrel community, we can actually build something and give it to them as a private add-on, and then they can use it. And we'll discuss a little bit about private and public add-ons a bit later on. And then obviously, as we're now releasing this framework out into the wild, we're hoping that a lot of our users of Squirrel will be able to build their own components to service their specific needs, either as a private add-on or a public add-on for the wider community. But we're quite excited to see what our community starts to build with this. So how does it work? Very briefly, the core of Squirrel, each add-on is an iframe, and it has the functionality to send and receive messages from Squirrel to the add-on. The add-on itself is actually a standalone project that has the functionality built into it to actually send messages from the add-on to Squirrel. So as I say, it's a completely standalone project, so you can really build whatever you want with that add-on, just with a common interface that will talk to Squirrel to send and receive messages. So really, the sky's the limit. You can go crazy on building stuff. So the next thing is developer program. In order to get started on this, what you need to do in your Squirrel account, you go to your account manager, and on the bottom left, you'll see developer portal. So to get started, you just put in your first and last name, and your company name is optional. At the moment, there's an early access code. Towards the end of the month, that's going to be removed. But for now, you need to put in the early access code, and that will get you into the program. The early access code will be, I'll display that at the end. So if you stay through to the end, you'll get that. And if you do need to drop off at any point, as Donald said earlier, the video will be sent to you later on, and that code will be there to help you get started and up and running a bit quicker than the rest. Okay, so where to find the Squirrel add-on documentation? There's a link there you can follow, or scan that QR code, and that will take you to it. It's got a load of different things that are covered in there. Initially, there's a bit about how to sign up, which I've already briefly mentioned. Then there's a lot in there about how the framework works, how the communication works between Squirrel and your add-on, how to prepare data to send across from your add-on back into Squirrel. Awful lot of information there. Then there's some bits on property panels. We're very proud of these. The way this this works is the property panels in your add-ons will work, look and work and feel exactly the same as the native components in Squirrel. So the way we've done it, we've got some information there that tells you how to set them up, specifically how to structure your JSON to show you exactly how to build those panels. And then we've got an element library full of elements that you can use in your property panel, along with a whole load of customizable properties that you can change. And that's all in the documentation, and we'll be using that during this demo today. So hopefully you'll get a feel of that. There's another section in publishing. So when you come to actually publish your add-on at the end, there's a few things you need to do to be able to put it up into the marketplace. There's a bit of text about what you need to put up there, and an icon that's going to be available inside of Squirrel, so that when people add the component into their project, and some other bits and pieces. But we've got some documentation there to cover all of those sides of things as well, which I'll show you a bit later on. And then we've got some getting started code, the stuff that's going to not starting with a blank paper. You've got some actual code to get you started, so we'll show you that as well. Right, to set up your environment, setting up your environment and testing. So there's 4 simple things that you need to do. Probably recommend you do it kind of in this order. First of all, you're going to need a Squirrel license, version 1.12 or above. Obviously 1.12 is the latest, so that's you now. The next thing, again, I'm sorry on that as well. It's for the free plan or the paid for plan is absolutely fine as long as you've got that. The next thing you'll need to do is install Node. So you can follow that link there. Show you here. Go to the Node website. Click on this box here. It'll download and install that to your system, and you're good to go there. The next thing you'll need is an IDE to do your coding in. We use and recommend Visual Studio Code. It's free and it's really, really good. You can follow the link there to this website, download it, install it, and you're good to go there. You're not limited to that. Obviously, if there's an IDE that you currently use and you prefer, you're fine, no problem at all. And then the last thing is you need the add-on starter code. So you're not really starting from a clean sheet. You've got something there to start off with. So in our documentation, we've got three sort of starters that you can do. One is an Angular one. One is plain JavaScript, and then there's an Angular, a React one that's coming shortly. So there's actually 2 at the moment. This particular one today we're going to be doing is with the Angular base, and this link here will take you to that. So let me just show you the documentation in a minute. So this is the documentation that we've got here. The website will take you to. We've got all the sort of information that will be useful to get you up and running and started. And I mentioned the Angular one, so let's look at that now. Building your first add-on. So here we go. This is where we can clone our the repository. So I'm going to copy that for now, and that's pretty much it for the slides. Now we're going to get stuck into the coding side of things. So if I jump to first things first, just go to where you want to set up your project. Open up VS Code. And the first thing we need in our terminal is just to paste in that git command there. So if we press that, that'll go off and download it for us. Just shut that back and show you here. So what that's done is it's downloaded our code here. We can actually rename that if we want to. Before we start, jump into the folder and open the VS Code again. Right. So the next thing we need to do is we need to get all the dependencies down for this particular project. So the dependencies are all in your package.json. We don't need to look at that today, but just to show you that's where they are. So what we're going to do is we just do npm install. Npm install, this won't work if you haven't installed that node. So I'd say I'd follow the steps that I put in that previous slide. So we npm install. What that's doing now is it's pulling down all the dependencies that we need and getting the project ready to go. And the next thing that we will do is once that's all ready to go is we can actually spin up this project on a local sort of server. And then what we can do is we can jump into Squirrel and we can bring in this basic component and start working with it. So that's ready to go there. What we're going to do now is npm run start. Again, these commands, you have to remember them. They are all in the documentation. So we'll get that going. You'll see here it puts on port 4401 and give this a chance to spin up. Doesn't take very long at all on this little project. Right, here we go. So it's ready to go. So we can just copy this URL here, and we'll take that, and let's jump into Squirrel. Okay, so when you sign up to the developer program, you'll notice there's a new thing down on the left side in the component library under add-ons. You've got this add-on developer program. What you do is you just click, bring that onto the canvas. And now this is what we're going to be using to, as we build out our add-on, to actually test it live, and we can see exactly what's happening with it. So if you look onto the right-hand side of the property panel, you can ignore this top section, which is the X and Y and width and height of this, and you can ignore the dynamic visibility. That's all just come in. It's this piece that we're working in here at the moment. So what we'll do is we'll paste in that URL, remembering that /. That's a bit of a gotcha there. Make sure that's there, and then let's get JSON files. So what we've got now, this is actually loaded up your add-on. This is the default basis starting add-on that's been loaded, and we've got these a basic property panel set up. So if we have a quick look at that, what this property panel entails, we've got a text area which is bindable, just like normal Squirrel components. We can actually type in it, and we can see that's actually updated there. And then we've got another field down here with a title of Hello World Response. It's bindable, but actually if I click into it, I cannot edit it. Okay, so what this is really showing as a starter is that we can put some data into the component, and we can see it represented there. And we've got this here, which looks like we can bind it to get some information out. So let's just do that a minute. I'm going to bind this one to this cell here. I'm going to bind the output to that cell there. I've got a text input here, which has nothing to do with the add-on framework. It's just been put in here. So as I type something into this in a minute, it's bound to this top cell. It'll write into there, which will in turn feed the add-on component here. So let's have a quick look at that. If I type in hello, we can see that that's actually gone into the component and it's displayed. And then the output from the component is actually come down in here, and all it's done, it's very simple. It's just taken what's been sent in, capitalized it, and sent it back out. But it's a good example of showing you how to send something into your add-on, processing it, and sending it back out. Okay, so with that said, let's have a little look behind the scenes at what's going on. So here is our code here. So the main add-on itself, we'll be looking at in a minute, which is inside this app folder here. But initially, the property panel stuff that we need to do to set up, there's three main files we need to look at: default state JSON, message binding JSON, and property panel JSON. Again, don't worry if you don't remember all these. Again, it's very clearly marked in the documentation, but I want to explain what all these do. So default state, this is what you're going to do initially to set up your properties. These are properties that you want to make Squirrel aware of, that these are properties you're going to pass from Squirrel to the add-on and back. So we declare all these properties here. So that you name these what you want. But in this demo, it's called Hello World Data, and we've set up the default state. The default value is test. We've got another property here, Hello World Response, which is declared as empty. So that's all we do. We just need to make sure we've got one of these for each of the properties that we're going to be sending backwards and forwards between Squirrel and your add-on. The next one is message bindings. So message bindings, this is where we can actually tell Squirrel, okay, of those properties that we've declared, this is exactly the sort of direction of communication between Squirrel and your add-on. And this is done from the viewpoint of the add-on itself. So for the property that we declared earlier, Hello World Data, the add-on is going to receive this information from Squirrel. So as we saw earlier, I typed in hello and it sent it in. This particular one, the Hello World Response, it is a piece of data that we're going to send from the add-on to Squirrel. So we just have to declare one of these for each of the properties, and we say whether it's a receive or send. You can also have one that is both, and that's obviously useful if you're doing sort of two-way communication. So we'll leave that as send for now. So, right, and then the final one is the property panel. So this one looks a little bit more involved, but don't let it it shouldn't be too overwhelming. So what we're looking at here is, if I grab Squirrel again, it's quite straightforward. We've got something here which is an accordion with a title of general, and it's got two child elements. One is a text area and one is this input here. So if we look at the JSON structure here, we've got this accordion with a property. The name is general, and then we can see it's collapse is set to false, so it's not collapsed by default, and it's got some a children object here, an array of different objects, and we've got those two objects that we saw in here. So if we look at these now, you've got an input box or two input boxes. The first one's got the text of hello world text as our label. We've said allow binding is set to true, so we know we can bind it. We've got the allow manual entry of true when we try to type in it, and then we've got text area set to true as well, so we can it's an actual text area. Whereas the second one, we see allow binding is true, but the allow manual entry is false, and that's why we couldn't actually type in it. So you don't have to remember these and work out and try and remember how this sort of structure works. As I said, it's all in the documentation. So let me give you a quick example of that. So if we go into where am I going? Here we go, property panel elements. First of all, the accordion. You can see here it tells you exactly this is what it looks like. So you get a little image of what the accordion looks like. You can see what the what the structure is supposed to look like. So you've got accordion, property, general, and then children, and then you can obviously cut and paste that into your project and then start adding child elements. So the child elements be an input box is one of the ones we're using here. So as you can see, if we look at this, you can copy and paste that directly in, but we've got a lot more properties here than we actually used in our in our example. What's this? A lot more. So we've only got a few in here. But if we look through the documentation, you can scroll down. You can see all of these are configurable properties that you can set, and there's obviously information about each of them. So the text area, we set one of them to true, but the default's false, which is why we left it off on the other one. So you can go through and look at these properties. I encourage you to look at each of the elements that we've got, work through the different properties, and experiment with them. Okay, so that's essentially the that basic property panel built out. The next thing we need to do is actually look at so that's property panels. Now we're looking at the actual add-on itself. So there are two files in here. The first one is Squirrel Helper. I'll briefly touch on this. This one is basically got a class has got all of the stuff that we need in there for all the communication to Squirrel and back, and it's there's a lot of different helper methods and things that you can use in here. When you come to start building add-ons, you don't need to do anything in this file at all. It's literally there for you to review, because we're using some of the methods in here in our current add-on, but there are other ones there that are available for you to use. So it's here for you to look through and be aware of, but you don't really need to touch anything in here. So add-on, this is where we're working, and if we look at the add-on, we can see that this add-on class extends the Squirrel Helper class, so we can use all of those methods inside here. So let's just do a quick jump around in here and have a look at what's going on. So first of all, we've got this initialize. So when your component first initializes, this is a life cycle hook of the Angular component. When it first initializes, it's going to call this function, which lives inside of the Squirrel Helper, and it's basically the thing that kicks off and starts that kind of handshake with Squirrel. So you don't need to do anything there. That just goes off and does its thing. When Squirrel then has sort of finished that handshaking procedure, it calls this next method, which again is one in Squirrel Helper. We've just overridden it here, so you don't have to do anything with it. It calls this method from Squirrel. It calls into the add-on, calls this, and passes in the state. Now the state is that default state that we set up initially on the default state JSON. So it's passing in all of your properties with all of their default values, so that you can then make sure that your add-on is in that initialized, or your initial state that you want it. So we do a quick check to make sure the states come in is actually valid or is equal to something, and then we can start processing that data. All we've really sent in this state is this hello world data, so it's quite a simple example. But if you were building a more complex one, you might have obviously a lot more properties that will come in, and you can get everything set up here. The next thing you have in here is this on property change, and it pretty much does exactly what it says there. It's something that if any of those properties do change, either by a user interacting with them, in design time, or if you're actually at runtime, sending something in that changes any of those values, then what will happen is that property, Squirrel will call this on property change, pass the name of the property that's changed and the value that it now is set to. So it's quite straightforward in here. We've got a switch statement. You just do a case for every single one of the properties that you want to listen for. So the hello world data, obviously, when I typed in the word hello, it changed from what the default was, which was nothing. And it came in and it said, right, okay, well, that property's changed and the new value is value. And so I'm just calling this little method to process it. We'll look at that method in a minute. So this first part is what you do on initialization. And then this is what actually happens once the component is initialized and it's up and running and having sort of data coming in from Squirrel. This little method that we've been seeing here, process data, this is not part of the framework. This is just literally for this particular example is a method that's been written, process data. And this is what you would do when you build your add-on. You would actually have your own set of methods in here for processing all of your different bits of pieces of data that come in. So this one's just showing you an example. We've got one called process data. It takes in a single string. And what we've done here is on initialization, we're passing in what we get from hello world data into that so it can process it. And also if hello world data changes at any point, we're also calling that and sending that value in. And all it's doing here is it's setting a variable that we've declared up here, hello world text, to equal to the value that we sent in. So I typed in hello earlier, so hello would come in and this variable would now contain that. We're using that in the HTML part of this, and I'll show you that in a sec. But we saw when we demoed that just now, it takes a value in, and then the add-on processes that value and then spits it back out to Squirrel. And it's a really simple process. So this is another method that's available to you in the Squirrel Helper. So all you do is this.send to Squirrel, the name of the property that you want to send information back on, and then the actual value of it. So all we've done here is very simple. We've taken the value of hello and we've used that JavaScript function there to do to uppercase, so just capitalizing it and then spitting that back out to Squirrel. And we saw that working earlier. So very, very simple for you to send that back, to send information back. If you're doing things with like multiple rows and columns and all the rest of it, you obviously need to make sure that your data is in the right structure to send back. That is all contained in the documentation. Explains exactly how to do that. So that will allow you to send it back. So definitely have a look at the information there. Then the next thing, we got your CSS. So we've got some basic stuff in here. This is sort of Angular host. There's the host element, so some of the CSS on that. But obviously, if you're building something quite large, you may well have a load of different CSS classes that you can specify in here. So you just do that as you would normally do when you're coding. And then you've got the HTML. So if I look at the HTML at the moment, it maybe looks a little bit overwhelming just for this demo. But if we jump back to here and look at it, we've kind of got a box, we've got a drop shadow, we've got an image, we've got this text on the bottom. The only thing we're really interested in at the moment is what's happening with this hello world and that text that comes in here. So you can kind of ignore this. It's just built to give you something to see on the screen. The important part is down here in this div here. So we've got hello world text, and that string is always there. And then that hello world text that variable that we set in the TS file, and we made it equal to the value that came in. All we do in order to display that is wrap that hello world text, that variable, inside double curly braces, and then that will appear inside of the component. Okay, spelling off. Right. The next thing I want to show you is just how you go about debugging stuff. So if you are wanting to, as you're working through with this, if you want to actually do some debugging, what you can do is, let me show you this first. So some of you may be aware of your developer console. So we can go localhost 8315. And if you spin that up, you get these two options here. If you select the localhost 4401, this basically is anything that's coming out of the add-on. You can trace out what's going on. So all the messages that we're seeing here are actually coming out of the Squirrel Helper at the moment. But for us, if in our component here, if we want to put something in, so I might want to do a console log and see what's actually happening with this value. Value is, and then trace out that value. So let's save that. If I bring this back and look here, you can see value is my dodgy spelling. But if I change that again to something else, hello, you can see value is hello. So that's simply how you can do your do basic console logging out while you're actually working on your file. So that is that, and I think that's pretty much covered most of the stuff to get you up and running with this basic component. I did mention at the start that I was going to talk about the differences between a normal component, visual component, and a function component. So a function component essentially is any component that doesn't have a visual element to it. So the visual components, they all appear, add-ons appear in your library over here on the left, but any functions appear in the drop down here. The add-on functions will appear down in here. So the way to differentiate between it, there's no real differentiation when we first start building. So to build a function add-on, you do it in exactly the same way, the same stubby code, and we'll convert this one now into a function so you can see exactly how that works. Very simply, all we do is we come into the HTML, grab everything and delete it. We go into the CSS, grab everything and delete it. Okay, now if we go back into Squirrel, we're seeing nothing in here. Don't worry about this box, that when it's a function that won't appear anyway. And now what we can do is we can type in hello, and you can see that the content is still gone into the add-on. It's been processed and come back out. So now it is essentially a function. And when we come to publish later on, I'll show you the difference there. You can specify this as a function rather than a component. And then at that time, when you set that, which one it is, it'll obviously appear in either the component library on the left or in the functions drawer. So very, very simple and straightforward. The functions will be an interesting one. I think it'd be good for you to look through some of the functions that we have already in the actual product, as well as some of the add-ons to get some ideas. But I do feel that there's an opportunity for some of our customers who have got some really big, large-scale projects where they've got big chunks of data coming in with lots of formulas to kind of process some of that data and then moving things around and all the rest of it. You could get to a point where you might say, right, well, actually, we're using several data movers and we're using a whole load of functions to do something. If you've got some sort of development capability in-house, you could say, right, well, I'm going to pass you this chunk of data into an add-on. I want to process all this stuff, and then I want you to spit that different chunks of that data out as some of the outputs here. Obviously not a component that would be something useful to lots of different people, but something that might be specific to your company. So there are lots of different ways to use the function component. So it'll be interesting to see what people start to do with it. Right. I think that's pretty much covered all of that. I need to jump into building the actual component now. So what we're going to do is for this particular demo, I've decided to look at using Bootstrap. Some of you may be familiar with Bootstrap. It's people use it for building all sorts of websites. You've got layout options and different components. One I'm looking at today is this pill badges one. So the pill badges. Pill badges basically are colored text elements that are containing small bits of information, and they're used for labeling content, displaying metadata, or sort of highlighting information. Now, you could look at this and say, well, I could build this in Squirrel already. I could use a rectangle around a rectangle as one component. I could put a label over the top of it and group it together. Brilliant, and that would work. But if you then started dynamically changing the text, you'd obviously need to make sure that your label grew accordingly. You'd need to make sure that if the label grew, you'd want the rectangle to size accordingly and what have you. So it can be a bit fiddly. So this makes sense to potentially be a small component we build. And looking at here, some of the options, we'd obviously want to be able to set the text that we want to put in there. It makes sense to maybe use these kind of default colors that they have here. So we could maybe do a drop down that's got these in here. We could do the font, allow them to change the font and the size of the font. and maybe the padding. And I think to make it a bit more squirrely, what we could do is actually put an additional item in the drop down to sort of say custom, so that then the user can specify what their background color and what their foreground color is. So that's kind of the little mini project we want to try and get done in about half an hour. And I think we have got about half an hour to do it. So I'm aware of everyone's time. I'll do my best to get it done in that time. If we do go over a little bit, as I say, it is recorded, so if you do need to drop on the hour, we will send the video afterwards. Right, so let's get going. Let's see, move this out of the way. I'll stop running this project. Right, so what I've done, not quite here's one I made earlier, but example, here we go. Right, so this is basically another one. I've brought out the stubby code and got that one up and running, ready to go. We'll get that one running now and bring it back into Squirrel. // again, that should be ready. Okay, so there's nothing showing and we've got no property panel, so that's great. That's the starting point. So we'll look first at setting our property panel up. So default JSON's our starting point. So I think the first thing we're going to need in our component, we need to have the text for the pill. So default text of pill badge. So we're going to make up some properties. We want a text property. We want some padding. I'll set it to 5. Then that type. So we had different types. So we had primary, secondary, success, danger, whatever. So we'll set our default type as primary. Then the next thing we need to do is look at the font. So let's have a look at the documentation. How do we do font in here? So we can scroll down, look for font. The font box, this is imaging. So if we add a font element into our property panel, this is what we're going to get. Looking at this now, I think for this component, let's keep it fairly simple. We just want the font and we want the size. So if we look at the state definition, I've got this here, which I can copy and paste directly into my project. Now, there's another thing that we use with the properties as well. I mean, here you can see it's a single property and a value, but we can actually build up these properties and group things up. And then when we refer to them later on, we can actually use dot notation. There's a lot of information on that in the documentation on how to do that, but you'll see this as I go here. So I'm going to make a style property here, and it's an object rather than just a single value. I'm going to paste in what we just grabbed for the font. I might change that to title because it's the title of the pill. And if I look through all this sort of default stuff, I'm happy to leave most of this as is. I might set the size to 18, make it a bit bigger. And the pill alignment left doesn't make sense. I'll make it center. And there we go. So that's the first one. Then the next thing is we said if they were to choose anything other than the primary selections there, if we chose a custom one, we want to be able to get some custom colors in. So we want our users to be able to choose the custom colors with the color picker. So if we look at color input, color picker, if we use that element, we're going to get this little box come up, which you may be familiar with in Squirrel. Then they can actually type in a hex value or click on it and select something. So if we look at the state definition for these, we declare the name of the property. We've got type, solid, color, all the rest of it. So quite straightforward. You can copy and paste that. I've got ones that I made here, which I'll bring in. So I'll paste that in here. So I've got one called custom color, which I'm going to use for my background. If they use if they choose custom, we're going to use a custom background of black. And then I've got a custom font color where we'll use white. Okay, so that is essentially our default state done. What we need to do now is look at our message binding. So let's keep that to the right so we can actually see that as we go. So as I said earlier, for every single one of these properties that we've built here, we do need to set up the message binding so that Squirrel knows the direction of communication on this. So let me bring this across here. Unlike our original demo, we're not sending anything back into Squirrel on this one. It's all pretty much receiving from Squirrel. So we're going to receive the text property, we're going to receive the padding, the type, and the style. So that's it there, saved, done. And then the last one is the property panel. So obviously this one's going to be a little bit bigger. So what we'll do to start off with is we'll grab, we need that accordion to start us off with. So we've got an accordion with general, an input box, text for our sort of pill label. We're going to allow binding, we allow manual entry, and then we're binding this property to our text property, text. So that's that done. You could just keep adding all your children, all the other boxes and elements to this one. But if you want to kind of group it up a little bit and try and neaten it up a bit, then you can do multiple accordions. So let's do another accordion. We'll set this one to style. And then it's an input box. This is going to be for our padding. Call it padding. Allow binding, yes. And we want to set it to the padding property there. So if I just save that a minute, as we get going, I'll bring in Squirrel, get JSON files. And so what you'll find here is that every time we make an adjustment to the property panel side of things inside your code, you do need to press get JSON files to bring the latest across. Okay. The other stuff to do with the add-on, which we'll get into later, when you edit that, they'll just do it automatically. But anything to the property panel, you will need to get JSON files and bring in the latest. So we've got our text and we've got our padding, but this box is just a box you could type any old thing into it. So I think just we can add a little bit to this. So if we look at our documentation again, we can see for the input box, there are an awful lot of different properties we can use here. So I'm going to throw a few more properties in on that box right now. I'm going to use, let's do this. Right, so I've got one type I've set to integer. I've got an allow counter set to true, so it's going to add little arrows on the side of the box. I've set a maximum value that I'm allowing that to go to. 1,000 seems a bit excessive on padding, but we'll leave that there. And then what we want the stepper to move on, so it's going to be one step at a time. And then we've also got this short property name you can put in, and I'll show you what that looks like. So if we refresh again here, you can see now this box has changed slightly. So we've got the little px there, so we know that the padding is in pixels. And then as we hover over it, you now have got these up and down arrows. We can't actually type any words in here now because it knows it's only accepting integers, and we can actually go up in steps one at a time, sort of thing on there. So it adds a little bit of finesse to your thing and also helps you with some of the validation, so you don't have to worry about people typing in text and then handling that. Right, the next thing we need to do is a drop down. Again, we can look at the documentation drop downs. We see what they look like. The structure we need here. So I'm going to grab that. I've got one already with those different options that we needed. So we'll throw that in here. That will be in here. So, right, so we've got it's a type drop down. We've got the label name, badge type, what property we're binding to, type. So it's obviously this type property, and the default we've set as primary. So primary here. If we obviously make a selection in any one of these, then type is going to be equal to whatever the option is that's selected. So that's save that. Do one more quick view on here. Get the JSON files. We now have that drop down. So it's simple as that. Okay, the next thing we want to see in here is the color pickers, but it doesn't make any sense to have color pickers here all the time, because if we choose any one of these, we're going to be using the internal colors that we're going to specify in the code. But if we use custom, then we do want to see those there. So this kind of introduces us nicely to the custom block, custom logic block. So if you look in the help section again, conditional logic block. So quite straightforward. We copy this block in, and what it does is it says, well, which property we're watching. We're watching the type property, and when it equals to something, not URL. In our case, it would be when it equals custom, then show anything that's in the children array here. So quite straightforward. I'm going to grab that now and bring that in. Just a second. Okay. Right, so we've got a conditional block. As I said, type equals custom. and then if that's true, show the children. And the children, we've just got 2 bits here for showing the color picker. I showed you that earlier in the documentation, so you can see exactly what's going on here. But we've got one with a label of custom background color. We've bound the property. This is where that dot notation bit comes in, as I mentioned earlier. So we can say, instead of we've got style dot custom color. So obviously we're referencing style dot custom color. So that's where it's getting it from, using the dot notation. And then we've got the second one, which is custom font color, and obviously accessing style dot custom font color. And we've turned the opacity off on this one. So the first one should have opacity, the second one shouldn't. So let's just save that and test that in Squirrel so we can see that working. So initially we shouldn't see anything happening here because we're on primary, but if we go down to custom, we now see that those are showing. And you've got the first one, which is for the background with the color, the opacity, and then the font we just got on its own there. So those are ready to go there. The very last thing we need to get in our property panel is our the font selection. We want to be able to change the font. And so for this one, I'm going to introduce you to another element, which is the sub accordion. And this is just something you can place inside your accordions, again, to try and organize and manage your property panel. So it's of type sub accordion. We're given the label of font. And then this information here is what we pulled in from the docs. So again, as I said earlier, we're going to keep it quite simple. So you can see things like has bold, has italics are set to false. So it should keep it very, very simple in the panel. So we'll save that. And last look at this and refresh. And here we've got the fonts section is here, and that sort of little sub accordion inside of the style accordion there. And we can change the fonts and we can change the size and what have you in there. So that's it. So we can kind of build up our property panel, and we can see and test as we go and see that it looks like it's working as we expect. Once we've done all that, we can now go into the code and get all this sort of wired up. So that is our all these sides sort of done and dusted. The rest we can actually jump into the add-on now. So let's jump across to there. So what we've got, I'll have a quick look at the HTML first. So the HTML for this is quite straightforward. What we've got here is a div with a class that we've made, which I'll show you in a sec, of pill badge. You can see this display text, a bit like our Hello World example earlier. We're going to be bringing in whatever the pill text is, setting it to this display text variable in our TS file, and then it will display in here. So that's the HTML, quite simple. If we look at the CSS for that, firstly, we've got the normal host element, and we've set to inline block, and we obviously the white space no wrap. We don't want it to wrap, it's a pill. We want it to all be on one line. The next thing you can see in here is I've declared a load of CSS variables. So you could call these whatever you like, but obviously give them fairly descriptive names is helpful. So I've got background color, and I've set its default value here. So I've set all those values, and then in the class that I made for that div, we've got width, height, and border radius set. But for the rest of these things like the padding and the background color and all the rest of it that we want to pass in, the fonts and stuff, we're making use of these CSS variables. So what that allows us to do in a minute is to go into our TS file. We can then bring the values in from Squirrel and then assign those values to these CSS variables, which will obviously in turn update the CSS here. And then in turn, we'll see that reflected in the HTML. So hopefully that makes sense. So if we go into the TS file, we'll jump over this. It should look relatively similar to what we did in the other one. There's a few extra bits in here. So we've got that display text defined, that variable that we can use, and we're using in the HTML. In the constructor this time, I've got this. I put element ref in here, and that basically is allowing us to get a reference to the native element of this component, which we can do to set the properties. I'll show you that in a sec. We've got the basic initialization, which we don't need to touch. We've got the on it. So this is when it's done the handshake, and Squirrel has now called this method and said, here you go, here's your default state for this component. So what we're doing here is we're setting the display text to state.text. I've still got this up over here so we can see it. So state.text, so it's getting the value of that. here we're still hitting state and getting the padding value, but we're trying to set that padding variable inside the CSS. So what we're going to do here is we do this.elementRef.nativeElement.style.set property, the name of the actual CSS variable we're trying to hit, and then we pass in the value that's come in from Squirrel. Padding itself in your CSS, as you may know, it needs to have padding of 5 isn't going to work. It needs to be padding 5px. So I'm just concatenating a px on the end of that so that that variable is set up correctly. Font family doesn't need anything on it. It's just whatever we passed in. So we set up those variables there, and we're good to go there. The next bit here, processing the pill badge type. So that type drop down. We're going to be calling this particular thing a few times, so it makes sense to actually make a method rather than duplicating code everywhere in this add-on. So I've got this add-on here which just passes in the state. This method here that passes in the state. We pass the state into it. So let's have a look at that. Quite straightforward. Again, this is one we've written. It's not part of the framework. It's just a method that we've written. So we pass state into it. We've got some little local variables set for background, for, and opacity. And it's a simple switch statement again, and it's basically looking at the state.type. So if the user has selected primary, we jump in here, we go to the primary, we set the background color to this blue hex value here, and then drop out the statement down to here. And let's get this bit of debugging. And then what we do here is we set the background color CSS variable to the background color that's been set, the opacity and font color. If, for argument's sake, the user had selected the custom instead of any one of these, it would drop down into the custom one, where we would have overridden all the background, the opacity, and the font color. And we'll set those to, using the dot notation again, using the values that have been sent in from Squirrel. So those get set, and then we just drop in here and set those CSS variables accordingly. It's quite straightforward there, I think. I'm trying to go through this fairly quickly, so we will again send out the code for this as well, so you can kind of work through it in slow time and have a look, and we'll try and put some more commenting in here as well. But I appreciate it's a lot to sort of take in, and while I'm rabbiting away. The next thing we had to do was the on-property change. So that was the initialization setup. That was done at the start. Then we got property change, as we said earlier in the other example. If any one of those properties change at any point, on property change gets called, giving the current property that's been sent in and the value of that property. So here we've got one for text, for padding, for type. We can use the dot notation to actually reach in and target specifically some of the things that come in on these. So the font family changes or the font size. And then you can see if the type changes or anything to do with the custom colors, we know we need to call this process pill badge type again, which will then obviously go through this process and make sure that the colors are set accordingly. So that's all that really does for the property change. I think that's pretty much covered everything there. I think I forgot to mention at the start, there was another method in here, on property change complete. Now that one, what that essentially does, as you can see here, we've got lots of different properties coming in, and some of those properties could change. A group of them could all change and be sent in from Squirrel into the add-on. And what will happen is, for each one of those changes, the on property change will it's stacked up, and it will go through each one of those properties in turn and set the different values in here. Now, if I had something crazy going on here where I needed to redraw a massive chart or something, I mean, this is quite a simple one. But if I was doing a big chart, I might not want to call, change this and then redraw the chart, change one of these and redraw the chart, and end up, 4 of those properties come in, I could be calling the redraw on the chart 4 times in a row. So what actually happens is, if there's a stack of changes coming in, what will happen is it'll process each of those, say 4 changes, it'll process all 4 of them, and then at the end of that stack, it will basically call this on property change complete. So if you've got like a pretty heavy render method or something, you could drop it into there, and then you're only calling that once after all those properties are set. But it's entirely up to you as the developer. That's what it's there for. You can use it or not use it. It's entirely up to you. So let me save that, and let's go back into Squirrel a minute. So you can see now we've got Our pill badge is drawn. We should be able to change the text, and it changes. We can change the padding. We can change the primary color. We can go custom. We can change those colors here. Very careful what I choose color-wise, otherwise I'll incur the wrath of the Mel. That's awful. Well, we'll go with it. Doesn't matter. Anyway, the colors changed, and then you can change the fonts and the font size. So that's all working there. One final thing to show on this, though, is that as you can see, that we've got the bounding box, so this is kind of not doing much at all. Now, there's two kind of, when you're doing a visual component, there's going to be two kind of ways you're going to have this. One, you're going to let the user decide how big you want this to be. So the user will decide how big they want the add-on to be, and you might be drawing a chart or something in there, and then you will draw the chart based on the size that Squirrel's told you that the user wants the add-on to be. Yes, you might want to constrain proportions and what have you, but yes, you're going to get given the size and you're going to set and draw it. But this particular component, the way it works, it doesn't really care what Squirrel's told it the size to be, because it's going based off the font. I mean, the text we put in. We could have a very small thing, or we could have a full-blown sentence, and we need the component to redraw itself accordingly. The font could be big, the padding could be small, and we need the component to actually say, no, I want to be this size. So we do have a mechanism for that. In the interest of time, we haven't got a lot of time left, so I'm just going to put that in just to show you it working. But what I'm going to do is I will be doing a blog post on this to for everyone to sort of understand how it all works. But I'll throw it in there for now. So I'm just going to quickly give this an ID, and let's go in here. I'm going to use the view child so we can reference that. Last bit here. Save that. If we go into Squirrel now, you'll see that actually it's snapped to the size of it. So this is basically telling the component is now, the add-on is now in charge, not of its position. Obviously, Squirrel still gets to choose where the position is going to be, but the size of it is now determined by the add-on. So if we try and the user tries to scale it, it's not going to scale. It's going to say, no, I'm this size. And then as we play around with the sizes and the text, it'll grow accordingly. And yeah, so there's those two different ways of doing it. So yeah, there will be a blog post following on that. Right, so that's kind of the component done. The very next thing we need to do now is get it ready to publish. So in order to do that, we need to stop running this in here, and we need to call npm run build add-on. Again, this is in the documentation, but we'll run that. That's actually building a production version of your add-on. All those console logs that were coming out from the Squirrel Helper will not be displayed now. Obviously, you should look at removing your own console logs when you go to a production version. That is now built. If I jump into here where the add-on is, example, you'll see here's all your files. If you go to the dist folder, Squirrel add-on, these are the files that you need to upload. Okay, so when I say upload, it's up to you as the add-on developer to decide where you want to host your add-on. When you come to submit it to the marketplace, you will then tell the market where your add-on is currently hosted. So for us, we use S3. So I've created a folder here. I'm ready to go. I'm going to drop this in here and upload it. And that's going to upload for us now. I'll bring this across. Right now that's uploaded, I can get the URL to where it is. Obviously, it's going to be different from wherever you've hosted yours. And then we can go into the developer portal. So obviously, there's a lot going on in here. Yours will have nothing in there at the start, but as you build up your add-ons, you'll start to see them in here. You can see things about whether they're private, whether they're public, they're in draft, whether it's a component or a function, usage count, stats, and all that sort of stuff. For now, we're going to jump into the creating an add-on. So we do that. We're going to give our add-on a name. So not build badge. Build badge. The URL, https / and then that URL I just grabbed. Now I said to you earlier about when you're publishing a function or a component, this is the drop down I was referring to. So you can either say it's a component or a function. You can see connection there. That's not there at the moment. That will be coming, but at the moment these two are supported. This particular one is a component. Default width and height. Now this is, you can imagine when you drag something from Squirrel from the library onto the canvas, you want it to be a certain size. So you as an add-on developer can say, no, I want my component to be this particular size. I'm going to leave mine as default because as we know, this particular one, it's not listening to Squirrel. It's in control of its size. So I'll ignore that for now. The next thing we need to do is upload an icon. Now, if I can point you back to the documentation here, we've got some helpful stuff on publishing. If you want to, when you're doing your submission, your add-on submission. So we've got some information here on your icon guidelines. It's a whole load of useful information here about do's and don'ts, things to think about, the color, the size, the dimensions of your icon, and it needs to be in the SVG format. And then in a bit, we're going to also be uploading an image. So we've got some stuff here about the images that are going to appear in the marketplace. So again, a bit about the file types that are accepted, the dimensions, the actual file size and what have you. So again, I'd encourage you to read through the publishing and add-on section of the developer documentation. Right, so back to it. So I'm going to upload that icon. So Misha's given me an icon for this. I've got a little pill icon thing going on there. I'm going to put a name, pill badge, and do a short description. And got version number, version 1.0. And then this is your add-on. So you can actually put in your support. You know, if you're going to support it, you put in your URL. If you've got any privacy policy or terms of service for your add-on, you can put all that information in here. Pick your the category. Again, for a private one, it's less important, but obviously if you're going to post it to the marketplace and you want people to browse and find it, then it's you know, good to think about the category you're going to put it into. And then we need to upload the image. So again, I've got this image that Misha made for me. You need a featured image, and then you need at least one other image. So I'm going to use the same one for the purposes of this demonstration. But what you can do is you can put multiple images up, and then you can also put, if you want to do some YouTube explainer videos on how your component works, you can put upload a YouTube or Vimeo or Loom video into here as well, and that'll appear. If you're doing something in your own organization and you're keeping it private, you want only certain people to see it, you can actually put the email addresses and things in here. I'll leave that for the time being. Let's just check I've got everything covered. I think we're good. Let's save and preview. Okay, so this is what it's going to look like on the marketplace. Now, it's not available on the marketplace. It's still down as a private add-on. So only I can see this, but I can share this link around in my team so others can have a look at it. But it's got the featured image, the name of it, description, some other bits and pieces in here. But to get hold of this, I just click on Get Add-on. And if you're not logged in, it'll log you in. You got this. I've now got that add-on. So we can actually have a look at it now. Now, when you do add a new add-on, you do need to restart Squirrel. When you add one to your product, you need to, Squirrel, you need to restart it. So we'll do that briefly. There we go. Okay. And if we look in the components now, we should see pill badge. There it is. So I've added that one in. We can click on it, put it on the canvas, and we've got it there. So we can say, hello world, and it's there. We've got the padding we can change. We've got the fonts again that we can change. We can do the custom and all the rest of it. So that's essentially it. It's all in there and done and ready. And that's it, built in about half an hour. I'll say we're on the top of the hour now. So let me just jump back to the slides. And the last thing, as I promised you, we can do some questions now. Donald, I can hand back to you, but obviously if you take a note of that early access code, if you guys want to get involved and have a start, please take a note of that, get started. And if you don't get it jotted down now, it will be on the back of the video anyway for you to look at. So yeah, Donald, back to you.
Thanks very much. Thanks very much, Matt. That was a whistle-stop tour. Amazing you got through it so coherently. So as Matt said and I said, this will be available as an on-demand recording, so you can go through it at your own pace. But there is a lot in there, and as Matt said, the documentation online is great, and so you can use that as a supplement to this. So, and we look forward to seeing what you guys make of it and what you and the things that you do with it. So we have maybe a minute left, and if there are any questions, I don't see any in the chat panel. But yes, Rich has put the early access code in the chat panel if you want to copy it from there. Before we close you'll lose the access to the chat, I think, after we close the conference call. So go into the chat panel and take that now. So yeah, so it doesn't look like there are any further questions. So we will end there. Thank you very much to Matt. You can take a well-earned rest. Not only did you do that, but you did it in like 40-degree heat as well. It's like, because for those of you who aren't in the UK, we are apparently one of the hottest places in the world today. We're 98% of the world is less hot than the UK today. So Matt is a great run through. So thanks everyone. I will I'll leave the meeting open for a little while so you can copy that code. But we'll say goodbye and see you next time. Thank you very much.